and we literally saw Lawson, Colapinto, and Tsunoda all battling for the title there.
It'll be good even to gauge Alex Albon's performance as well, because I think for quite a while he's not necessarily had the most competitive or experienced of teammates. So I think there'll be a little bit of pressure for Alex, I think. If I'm Christian Horner, I'm doing everything that I can to get Colapinto in the RB, and I'm promoting Liam Lawson to Red Bull.
Hello everybody and welcome back to The Turning Point. We're talking Franco Colapinto today, as you can see by the title and the thumbnail, and I needed to get in a Franco Colapinto expert. There was nobody better than PitStopNic. How are you doing, Nicole?
I'm very well, thank you. Let's use the term expert loosely. I'd say fan as well as very interested in his career. So,
I don't think you can call yourself a fan when the Colapinto merch originally from Williams sold out and then you made your own merchandise. I think that is the definitive, definitely on the Colapinto hype train.
Yes, and no regrets. I've really wanted to show my allegiance, show my support, but you know, times are tough. Williams merch was sold out, so I took it into my own hands. My favorite thing to do is to just doodle on my iPad. So I was like, what a better way than to make like a 90s hip hop style Franco Colapinto tee, wax it up on Redbubble, and there you go. It came like 2 days later, and yeah, getting some random looks when I wear it in public, but that's fine.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? You talk about Franco Colapinto and the fact that he's taken you by storm. He's taken the Formula One sphere by storm, considering this is a race driver who is only likely to be in Formula One for 9 races. So we want to talk about that. We want to delve into how Franco Colapinto, first of all, got to this point, because he seemingly came out of nowhere. You know, everybody talks at the beginning of the season about who are the hottest prospects coming into the Formula One grid. I can't remember anybody talking specifically about Franco Colapinto. And then the fact that he has come onto the grid, he's got a very short period of time, but the buzz around him is ridiculous. The first Argentine driver on the Formula One grid in 23 years. And up until, obviously, Bortoleto just signed recently, he was the only South American driver on the Formula One grid. Something that has been synonymous with Formula One. I think you kind of go back in time, you think more of the Brazilian side of things. You go even further back in time, you then have some Argentines winning championships and being right at the forefront of Formula One in its beginnings. But Franco Colapinto, as an Argentine coming into Formula One and starting where he started, is a very different story to a lot of the Formula One drivers that we see. I mean, you made a video on him a few weeks ago and talked about how he started off obviously racing and karting in Argentina and was just absolutely wicked even at that really, really young age.
I think his journey into Formula One and the past couple of months is such a testament to how quickly things can change, not only in Formula One, but for specific drivers. And I think that the fact that it was such a surprise that not only was he matching or surpassing the performance of his teammate Alex Albon, but that no one had really talked about him. And I think that was even more powerful, that he sort of came out of nowhere and there wasn't anywhere near as much pressure, especially given that he was replacing Logan Sargent, who obviously hadn't performed very well. So I think that the pressure was probably as low as it possibly could have been, arguably, given that...
Yeah, there was no expectation at all, was there?
No, and I think as well, Williams's issues with replacement parts for their cars and having to sort of revert to old spec cars due to damages and things. I think they were just in quite a difficult position as a team. So to then see sort of points being scored and consistency was really refreshing. But I think there's so many factors that have gone into his incredible entrance into Formula One. And I think nationality plays a huge part as well. But yeah, I think it's been very refreshing to see, for sure.
Yeah, I think completely agree. It's one of those things where a driver can come in, and the Formula One sphere can be quite a melting pot of positive and negativity, depending on how you do within millimeters of one race to another. You know, it is a cutthroat business that Formula One is. And I think Logan Sargent is a testament to that. Logan Sargent came through was really quick in Formula 3, was battling for championships with Oscar Piastri. Like, and you look at where those careers have deviated from that point. Oscar Piastri now one of the most heralded young drivers on the Formula One grid. Logan Sargent couldn't finish his, season with Williams and ended up getting dropped out of the team with 9 races to go. Those two were side by side with one another just a few seasons ago. It can really change fast when it comes to Formula One. And actually, I wanted to talk about that with Franco Colapinto because he hasn't gone the super traditional route, you would say, but he has bumped wheels with a few drivers on the Formula One grid already. And actually a few drivers that is quite interesting that he's bumped wheels with already. So for those of you that don't know, he moved to Italy when he was aged 14. And already you're like looking at Formula One drivers. And I know Zhou Guanyu did a similar thing, sort of moved from China to the UK at a super young age. That's the kind of dedication that you have to have going into a motorsport career. And then I don't know whether you know, but in 2019, Franco Colapinto's dad sold their house to fund his Formula 4 season. So they were committed to Franco Colapinto kind of going into single-seater racing and trying to do his thing. And in Formula 4, he was absolutely phenomenal. Like, he entered the Spanish Formula 4 season in 2019, and what was it, 11 victories, 13 podiums, just took the absolute place by storm and won everything that he possibly could.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those situations where the higher the risk, the higher the reward. And that's obviously paid off for him. But for so many drivers, it doesn't. And they don't quite make it to the pinnacle of motorsport. But yeah, I think it's so interesting seeing his move from karting in Argentina over to Europe, because that's really where a lot of drivers really make their mark and showcase their talent and their drive and their commitment. It's really interesting to see and compare the drivers that he was racing against then to where they are now. And I think it's really difficult to compare careers directly. As you mentioned, he's not necessarily had the most traditional route, but I think, like we briefly mentioned, Oscar Piastri and Logan Sargent, I think that's a great example of situations where two careers can go down completely different paths, and that's based on sponsorships, the teams that you get with, the training that you have, the time in a sim even. So I think, yeah, it's really interesting, and I'm really pleased for Franco that he's made it to a Formula One team and is able to showcase his talent and what he brings to the grid with that. But I think he definitely showcased his talent arriving in Spanish F4. And I think he had some support from Fernando Alonso, if I'm right in thinking.
Did indeed, yeah.
Yeah. I don't have the specifics on that. It was a little while ago that I made my video, but I think it is. I think he did have some sort of endorsement from Alonso.
Yeah, and Fernando Alonso is one of those. Well, as we've seen, Gabriel Bortoleto is also managed by Fernando Alonso. It does feel like if you've got a connection with Fernando Alonso somewhere, you usually do pretty well. It's one of those things that he's just kind of in the background of quite a few Formula One drivers' upbringing. And the fact that he's still in Formula One now is obviously insane. Like, he's been around. You think about these drivers, they were probably born and started watching racing as Fernando Alonso was sort of getting into it and winning his world championships. And the fact that they're now alongside him is ridiculous. But you mentioned something there with Franco Colapinto and the fact that it was that risk reward. The fact that he's come into Formula One, or back in the day was Formula 4 as well. And he has that little bit of sort of urgency about having to deliver. So back in Formula 4, his dad sold his house. Coming full forwards, he's got that pressure of only having 9 races. And I think that's something that, because of that experience in Formula 4 and having that pressure on him then, he's been able to jump forward and really deliver under the excessive pressure that is Formula 1 now. And it does make me feel like, as you say, when you've got that little bit of risk behind your drive, you do tend to see drivers step up to the plate a little bit more. And do you think that factor is also why Franco Colapinto has almost been able to drive without any real sort of or drive with an ability to just showcase his talents purely?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I think pressure can make or break a driver, but I think at the same time he probably hasn't had that much time to be able to even understand the pressure or the situation of, I guess, proving himself. Given that it was days upon him finding out that he was going to be replacing Sargent to him actually being in the car behind the wheel. So I think maybe it's the lack of preparation that has allowed him to enter the team more freely and have that sort of lack of inhibitions when he's driving and making those moves that other drivers might be a little bit more hesitant towards, or the other rookies, given that he's just sort of, I don't know, it's a difficult one, and I think it's great to see, but I think at the same time it's probably, from my perspective, the lack of anticipation and that window of preparation, which I guess in some ways could be seen as beneficial, but I think in his case it's definitely aided him.
Yeah, I think so. I think I completely agree with you there. It's sort of that, I don't know, the jeopardy behind having that seat and the fact that he can be a little bit free, but also has that pressure. He knows that this is maybe his one and only shot, but he's had bigger pressures previously that he's had to contend with, and therefore can come into it and be like, you know what, I can just enjoy these 9 races. Williams are in a point in the Constructors' Championship where there's not too much to fight for anymore. Coming after the summer break, Alex Albon hitting a little bit of form. It felt like they might be able to close the gap to some of those drivers and some of those teams above, but in recent weeks, that's kind of swung the other way, and RB and now Alpine getting that double podium finish seem a light year away from Williams in terms of that championship. But kind of going back to Franco Colapinto, and I guess as we put the puzzle pieces together that makes Franco Colapinto this kind of X-factor driver that he is, I thought it was interesting you mentioned those connections to other drivers on the grid, and Oscar Piastri being one of them. He did race against Oscar Piastri at one point in that kind of early part of his career. He was in the Formula Renault Euro Cup, like Victor Martins, Kushmaini, other race drivers that people will know now from Formula 2, but they do bump wheels and you do kind of butt heads with a lot of drivers as you come up. Like 2020, he was then in the Formula Renault, and I think Victor Martins won that championship. Franco Colapinto was in 3rd. So he really did test himself against other drivers who are now well respected. So it's not like, for those people that were kind of covering Formula Renault at that time, they probably would have seen Franco Colapinto as somebody to come into Formula One straight away. But he did hit a little bit of a stopping point. It was one of those weird things with Formula One, isn't it? You mentioned before, just having the right team around you, having the right budget around you at the right time. And in 2021, Franco Colapinto's entire career took a right turn because he didn't have that funding behind him, the budget constraints that he showed, had to dip out of sort of single-seater racing, go into Le Mans. And again, is that something that just allows him to build a little bit of resilience, because he's almost got a second run at it? You know, a lot of drivers, as soon as they come off that ladder of Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1, it's very hard to get back on again, let alone keep climbing the ladder.
Yeah, and I think that, I guess, diversion, I think it was the ELMS that he did, and then obviously he did race in 24 Hours of Le Mans. But I think that track time is not to be overlooked and is very valuable in terms of just getting time behind the wheel and making connections. I mean, I can't remember exactly who his teammates were, but I believe he was teammates with Nick de Vries in that series. So even then, we're seeing familiar names, people who have, potentially had a shot at Formula One. And I do think it's really interesting. Some people might see it as, him sort of trying to bide his time and maybe a negative, but I think really it can be seen as a positive. I think you see a lot of even like drivers in F2 spending a bit of time doing a little bit more of that endurance racing and trialing it, and I think it can be a really nice step in terms of, okay, well, I'm at this crossroads right now. I might not make it past Formula 3, Formula 2. I might not make it up to Formula 1. okay, is WEC an option for me? Is racing hypercars an option for me? And it's, I guess, expanding their versatility as a driver. But also, I think it's all great experience in terms of, just different types of racing, different types of cars. And I think overall makes them a more well-rounded driver. So I think that was probably quite a good step for Colapinto in terms of just gaining that extra experience.
Yeah, I can see that actually. Sort of, as you say, if you're not gonna risk it all on getting into Formula One, which a lot of drivers don't have the option to do. As you say, there's only 20 seats on the Formula One grid at the moment. There's a lot of drivers in Formula 2 and Formula 3 that are hoping to make that step up, and not everybody is going to be able to. I like that you mentioned Nick de Vries there, though, because that does link into the news around Colapinto at the moment, and actually the links that he does have to Red Bull and the RB side of things. Obviously, Nick de Vries will be looking at this and thinking, I'd quite like to still be in that RB seat myself, but Daniel Ricciardo kind of coming in, then Daniel Ricciardo being replaced by Liam Lawson. That's not fully confirmed. And I thought it was really interesting that all three of the drivers that are linked to that RB seat in Lawson, Colapinto, and Tsunoda also already guaranteed for next year, but those three literally raced side by side in the Toyota Racing Series a few years ago. And it's interesting to see like where they were at. So the Toyota Racing Series is one of those series that's sort of Formula 1, Formula 2 adjacent. Like a lot of Formula 1 drivers have cut their teeth in it. Thinking previous winners are like Lance Stroll won it in 2015, Lando Norris won it in 2016, even Robert Schwartzman won it in 2018, someone who's been very close to the Formula 1 sphere but never quite been able to get onto the full-time Formula 1 grid. But Liam Lawson won that in 2019 and then came back for the 2020 season with Franco Colapinto. And we literally saw Lawson, Colapinto, and Tsunoda all battling for the title there. So again, you see those kind of cyclical parts of Formula One where those three drivers now linked to RB were all right beside each other. Lawson was already a Red Bull junior, Yuki Tsunoda already a Honda junior, Franco Colapinto the only one without a racing seat. And actually, Franco Colapinto beat Yuki Tsunoda in that series. So we had Liam Lawson finish in second, Franco Colapinto finish in third, and Yuki Tsunoda finish in fourth. And it was quite a distant fourth as well. So then it's like, did RB / AlphaTauri choose the right driver in Yuki Tsunoda for 2021 when Lawson was there, Colapinto was there? Also, Igor Frager won the championship, but I'm not sure what he does now. I think he's a reserve driver somewhere. And again, you're like, okay, Igor, maybe he should have been the choice, but he just disappeared into obscurity.
Oh, it's so interesting looking at career paths, and I think, I guess their results in the Toyota series is obviously not reflective of where they're at now as drivers, given what's happened in between. And I think even now, if we compare the likes of Lawson, Tsunoda, and Colapinto, it's really difficult to gauge how closely they are in terms of as a fully rounded driver. Obviously, over one lap, it's more easy to compare Lawson and Tsunoda, given that they're in the same car. But we're never really going to be able to gauge the like-for-like comparison of how quick of a driver Colapinto is compared to the two of them, unless he did a lap in the same conditions, same track, etc. So I think it is really difficult to gauge that. And then also you've got racecraft, you've got how much they feed back to their engineers, you've got, do you know what I mean? It's so difficult to compare a driver and their quality based on their performance, especially in different cars. But it is interesting to look back at results. But of course, you know, they'll have progressed completely differently. And as we know, Yuki Tsunoda has the most time behind a Formula One car out of the three. So arguably he is the right choice to have already got that seat locked in, because he has the most experience, regardless of, you know, some of the chaotic moments we've had with Yuki Tsunoda. But yeah, and then obviously sponsorships play into it as well. So I'm sure that's definitely a big factor and consideration for the Red Bull group in terms of who they're going to put in that seat, in terms of commercial longevity and, you know, how much support that driver will bring with them, etc. So it's really difficult to give a a like-for-like comparison, but definitely interesting to look back at their results and to see where they ranked
Yeah,
back in
just
2020.
as you say, it's a long time ago now, and lots of things have changed. And the fact that Franco Colapinto's in that mix altogether, the fact that, you know, those two are already linked to Red Bull, they've kind of continued their journey through the Red Bull sphere. Whereas it wasn't until 2023 that Franco Colapinto was kind of picked up by a Formula One team, which is absolutely massive when it comes to kind of making that jump up into Formula One. Like 2022, Franco Colapinto was in F3. He finished 9th in the championship. You know, it was a tough year because Martins, Maloney, Behrman were battling for the title. There were some big sort of names in there. Then 2023 rolls around, he kind of has another bite of the cherry. But that's when he then got linked to Williams. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this, especially because coming into this year, we're seeing the likes of Ollie Behrman get a seat, Kimi Antonelli get a seat. I suppose Gabriel Bortoletto is a slight difference into what I'm going to ask you, because so far this season, Behrman and Antonelli haven't had the best of Formula 2 campaigns, and yet they're the drivers that are at the forefront, I think, because they're already linked to Ferrari, to Mercedes. They've done so much work in the simulator. So that getting picked up by a Formula 1 team and that having an effect, do you think that's been a huge part of Franco Colapinto and the Williams team almost being able to say, yes, you can come in for Logan Sargent for these final 9 races of the season?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's that investment and nurturing from a Formula One team that allows them to make that jump. And like you said, their performance and rankings within the Formula 2 standings isn't necessarily reflective of their talent and ability. But I do think that it is very frustrating for those drivers that do win or rank very highly within Formula 2 to then not be given the opportunity just because their face doesn't quite fit at a team. Let's take Dennis Hauger, for example. Obviously was teammates at MP with Colapinto and used to be part of the Red Bull Academy. Obviously didn't perform as well as they thought he would and just got the boot. And still raced.
Red Bull is the hardest team to keep your seat in.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's cutthroat. And regardless of which Formula One team it is that you're within their driver academy, I think it's always going to be cutthroat. And yeah, obviously now Hauger isn't racing in Formula 2 for the rest of the season, short little period that we have left. But it is very interesting to see the difference between even two teammates. And, you know, if we rewind a few years ago, you'd maybe thought that Hauger had more of a chance at Formula One than Colapinto did, but how quickly the tables turn.
Yeah, most certainly.
So yeah, I think it is very interesting, and I think a lot of us do have big question marks around Antonelli, for example, who you know, is still so young and still has so little time behind even the wheel of a Formula 2 car. But saying that, we don't have access to all the data that the teams have. We don't know what his work in the simulator has been like. So I guess they know a lot more than we do, so we can only speculate. But we'll definitely be intrigued to see what the Battle of the Rookies is like next year.
We'll get to that a little bit later, actually. But yeah, I do think it is one of those things where it's kind of better the driver you know. And like, as you say, the drivers that have had that time in the simulator have kind of connected themselves with a Formula One team early. They seem to be the ones that teams, especially nowadays with all the simulator work that they get to do, the teams have so much more information than we do. And maybe that's what James Vowles would have seen in Colapinto coming into this year. You know, we're saying from an outside perspective, a lot of us didn't see it coming, but James Vowles came in January 2023. I also like that Franco Colapinto was signed by Williams in January 2023. Like, I'm not saying that James Vowles was involved in that, but I do think, you know, both of them coming in as like new guys. You know, when you're like, you start a new job, but there's also somebody who's new. So you're like, we're the new people. And
absolutely.
Maybe James Vowles and Franco Colapinto were like that. You know, James Vowles like walks into the Williams cafeteria. He's holding his tray of lunch. He doesn't know who to sit with. He's the new guy. Franco Colapinto's also sitting on his own because he's new.
I love that idea. And yeah, I mean, it's so right though. It's almost like, you know, James Vowles is sort of making his mark within the team, and someone starting at the same time as you, it's almost like he's been able to oversee all of his time with the team and really track his progression and stuff. And I think Williams is such a great team to have come into Formula One with. I think James Vowles has been transformational for Williams, and I think even like the debriefs that he does for the Williams social media, even you can tell how articulate he is. You can tell what a great leader he is, and I think, yeah, it's great to see how high his hopes are for the team and how confident he is with his plans and things. And obviously, he's sort of alluded to that when talking about convincing Carlos Sainz to sign with the team. But I think it's definitely, I'm sure, aided Franco's entrance into Formula One.
Well, yeah, definitely aided his entrance, but not aided his future. As you say, Carlos Sainz is the big problem for Franco Colapinto. So moving into the future, we're looking at Franco Colapinto's performances and we're going, he looks brilliant. He looks right on it. Soon as he got into that Formula One car, what was it, a 12th place finish in his first Grand Prix, and Logan Sargent's best finish across the entire season was 11th. So already you're like, okay, he's on par with Logan Sargent's best performance of the year in his first Grand Prix. And then he scores points in Azerbaijan, scores points in the USA, and you're like, right, he's the real deal. But just a few weeks beforehand, Williams have signed probably their most lucrative driver deal in recent memory for Carlos Sainz, who is a huge driver. So there's no chance of James Vowles sort of going, actually, Carlos, we've got this rookie who's really good. So I know that you're driving for Ferrari right now. I know you just won Grand Prix, but we're going to go with Franco.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the kind of driver that you would turn away, especially after grafting to try and get him locked in for 2025. So I think, yeah, James Vowles is probably not questioning his decision, but probably I don't know, thinking about the future of the team. And I mean, I'm sure there's still lots of conversations happening about next year's grid, but regardless of contracts that have been signed, not necessarily for Williams, but for other teams. And I recently made a little video about driver swaps, and there have been all sorts of rumors, like some people saying that Carlos will go to Red Bull or to be teammates with Max, and Colapinto will take his place, and all that kind of thing, which obviously comes with a lot of question marks. But I don't think that's likely to happen. I think that Carlos is locked in there, and although people do say it's a little bit of a step down, I do think that I'm interested to see how he performs with the team, and I think it'll be good even to gauge Alex Albon's performance as well, because I think for quite a while he's not necessarily had the most competitive or experienced of teammates. So I think there'll be a little bit of pressure for Alex, I think.
I think the pressure's kind of come to Alex Albon already, hasn't it? If you look at the 6 races that they've had side by side, sort of Monza, okay, Alex Albon got some points, looking great in that Williams, but it was the first outing for Colapinto, and he made that tiny little error in Q1. And had he not, I think it would have been a little bit different for him and how the race weekend would have gone. And it's just those fine margins, especially in the midfield, with it being so competitive. But since then, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because Alex Albon has gone through a little bit of a down period. Obviously, 3 DNFs, or, well, Brazil was technically a did not start. So 3 non-finishes in the last 4 Grand Prix weekends. Obviously, Colapinto's Brazilian Grand Prix wasn't great either. So maybe we just put that one aside for the whole Williams team. But beyond that, where we've got sort of, okay, a 9th place and a 7th place for Albon in Monza and Azerbaijan, since then, DNF, 16th, and another DNF, where Colapinto has been right there, 11th, 10th, 12th. Those kind of positions that in the midfield are super, super competitive. And like getting those points, you know, I've been massively praising Nico Hülkenberg throughout the season for finishing 11th so consistently. And I know it doesn't deliver points, and Nico Hülkenberg has also finished in those point scoring places. But if you look at the amount of times Nico Hülkenberg scored 11th place, he's always the driver there just in case. And Colapinto is almost putting that Williams car into that position where it's like, okay, if something goes wrong for the driver in front, I'm that next driver to pick up the points. And that is an amazing position for him to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as this season draws to a close and drivers are already going to other teams next year. I think we're at a really interesting position where the midfield is so tight and there are literally points between millions of pounds worth of prize money, which is obviously so important for some of these midfield teams who don't have the funds like our top teams do. This could be transformational in terms of development over the next few seasons. Yet some of these drivers' allegiances aren't necessarily still fully with the team, regardless of whether they say, of course, I'm going to put my all into this team. They're going to be out for themselves a little bit, maybe less likely to want to, obey team orders, or they're going to want to try and take those extra risks to demonstrate their personal performance rather than fully for the team. So I think that in itself gives us a really interesting element to these races and to these qualifying sessions. But yeah, as you mentioned, I think we do have the Haas quite often, well, particularly this season, quite often they're picking up the points, especially if we have some collisions or chaos within the points, within the top 10. So nice to see that Franco is able to have that competitive edge and to be able to really try and put himself in the game, in the race, literally, for those points. And I think we saw, God, why have I forgotten the race where Franco... Well, Alex claimed that Franco dive bombed down the inside of him.
Yes,
Singapore. Yes. Gosh, my memory. And I think the fact that Alex wasn't expecting him to be so competitive and take those risks is a really interesting reflection of maybe his mindset. And I think probably since Singapore, Alex has probably had a bit of a shift and maybe a can I say kick up the arse? Maybe he's had a bit of encouragement now to really bring his A game, which unfortunately hasn't really worked out for him as of the last few races.
I was going to say, since Singapore has probably been his worst stint of the season. So
maybe he's cracking under pressure a little bit.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's very interesting. But as we know, Alex is a master of defense and is great for holding up the field when he needs to and being very defensive. So I think in terms of... I think Alex probably has more experience than Franco, whereas Franco is probably more likely to take those additional risks and maybe try and go for some of those lunges and those more risky overtakes because he's a little bit more naive to the consequences of maybe not making it out of some of those risky moves. And I think Alex is probably a little bit more rational, a little bit more sensible, not only because of his experience, but also knowing how critical it can be to overall team performance and how much damage can, be an issue for Williams. So, I think that maybe is why Alex is maybe slightly more conservative of a driver at the moment. But I'm not making excuses for him. He definitely he needs to step it up in this last triple header for sure.
I think he needs to step it up now, and then probably needs to step it up again for Carlos Sainz coming in next year. And I want to get your thoughts on this. So if you're James Vowles, and you're gonna play a few roles over the next sort of 10 minutes or so. If you were James Vowles at this point, you're looking at Carlos Sainz coming in, Alex Albon being beside him. Are you in the mindset that you really want to keep hold of Franco Colapinto just in case? Like, I know James Vowles has said that they're actively working with other teams, like they're trying to find the right arrangement for Franco Colapinto moving forwards. Obviously, that Sauber seat has now closed, so that was the big one that was sort of talked about, and now that's also gone. But he is still being linked with that RB team. But there's a part of me that thinks James Vowles holding on to Franco Colapinto might be a really good idea, just in case Alex Albon doesn't perform as expected, Carlos Sainz doesn't perform as expected, or either one of them get a move back to a top team. Like, if Lewis Hamilton retires out of nowhere, maybe the Ferrari isn't what he thinks it's going to be. It would be insane. But if he did, or even if like somebody in one of the top teams gets injured, Carlos Sainz surely would go straight back into one of those spots. Especially at Ferrari. I think he'd go straight back into that team. He's cut no ties with the Ferrari team. Mm-hmm. So then if you've still got Franco Colapinto as your reserve driver, you can slot him in. If Williams have given away Franco Colapinto, they find themselves in a really sticky situation once again.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to this. I think in an ideal world, James Vowles keeps Colapinto as is. He's the reserve driver and he's there on standby should anything happen. I think that going to another team, even if it is temporary, even if it is, okay, you'll go to VCarb, RB, whatever we're calling them, for a season or two, and then we slot you in maybe when Alex or Carlos departs the team. I think even then, you're working with another team, you're picking up different habits, they're molding you and shaping you as a driver into working in the way that they want. And I think that could potentially damage the way that Franco would then potentially slot back into the team.
Mhm.
It's difficult to articulate, but I think that you work so closely with a team and you get used to that way of working. And I know Franco hasn't necessarily been there for that long, but I think really you want to shape and mold a driver to the team. And I think that's what's going to be so interesting about the Hamilton move to Ferrari, not to digress. But I also think that if James keeps, obviously it's not just James's decision, but if James Vowles keeps Franco within the team as a reserve driver, but there's other teams coming and knocking on the door saying, we really want his talent at our team, we really want him on the grid, there's that risk that Colapinto then resents Williams for holding on to him so tightly. And, he's sort of saying, well, I want to go and drive for another team. I want to be out there on track. No driver wants to be a reserve driver, realistically. So I think there's a few things at play here, but I think that best case scenario for James Vowles and Williams is Franco stays as reserve driver and they keep him within the team and keep him working very closely on the development of the car, keep him close to the team. And yeah, I think that's probably an ideal world, but I think there's danger of a few different things happening dependent on different scenarios.
Yeah, I think as you say, if I'm James Vowles, I want to try and keep hold of him. But if I'm Franco Colapinto, I do want to try and find a racing seat. Like Formula One drivers' careers, okay, they're getting longer. And I had Alonso, Lewis Hamilton kind of showing that, but they are still short. And you can be kicked off of the grid at any point. So it's very difficult to say, well, right now, loads of teams are talking about me. I'm right at the front of the press and you're not giving me a seat. So why can't I go elsewhere? Especially when Red Bull and RB already seem to be knocking on the door. So take your Williams cap off. You're no longer James Vowles. You're now Christian Horner. Which
God forbid.
is probably a less exciting person to be. But Red Bull, obviously, throughout the entire year, and also throughout Sergio Perez's entire time at Red Bull / Daniel Ricciardo's entire time, Nick de Vries, they've rattled through some drivers in recent years fairly swiftly of the Red Bull team. So they're not sort of adverse to changing things up if they think it will benefit, well, Max Verstappen more than anybody else, to be honest, but if it will benefit the team long term. And you look at Red Bull at this moment in time, it feels like it's Colapinto's best chance at filling a seat for next year. They seem to have reservations about Isaac Hadjar. They're still not 100% sure on Yuki Tsunoda. Like, even Yuki Tsunoda now isn't being talked about that seat going in alongside Max Verstappen. Like, considering he's been there for so long, that kind of tells you what they think of Yuki Tsunoda. And I know that we're only 3 races into Lawson's sort of 6-race stint, but we have seen 10 competitive sessions with Liam Lawson in the car. If you're Christian Horner, you're looking at Yuki Tsunoda, Liam Lawson, Colapinto's just come involved. Sergio Perez still isn't performing as expected. Like, Sergio Perez has been in Q3 once in the last 5 qualifying sessions. He's only scored 7 points in the last 3 races. So in that time, where Yuki Tsunoda's been alongside Liam Lawson, Lawson scored 4 points. So over half of what Sergio Perez has scored. Tsunoda scored 6 points, so there's only 1 point off Sergio Perez's score for those 3 races. Max Verstappen has scored 62. Now, I know Max Verstappen's in like a league of his own. You'd think Sergio Perez would be a little bit closer to Verstappen's end of the table rather than just 1 point ahead of Yuki Tsunoda in the last 3 races. If you're looking at it from Christian Horner's perspective, and you've just got a complete blank slate, I'm assuming you're keeping Max Verstappen in the Red Bull seat. But alongside him, and then in the RB slots, who would you have where?
First of all, imagine they say, actually, to make sure that VCarb do well in the Constructors' Championship, we're just going to put Max in for the last few races. We've tossed away the Red Bull Constructors' Championship, so let's just try and imagine. Anyway.
Let's consolidate sixth place.
Yeah. So I obviously would keep Max Verstappen where he is. I think I'm a victim of this. I'm guilty of this, of recency bias. I'll look at the last few races and think, oh, does that driver deserve to have that seat? Should we be talking about a driver for this seat? And it is very easy to think of the last race or the last few races, but I do think that Sergio Perez has passed his expiry date at Red Bull, and I think there's a lot of external influences that are keeping him there. Not only the sponsorship, not only the support of Mexico, but also I believe Formula One management have something to do with keeping him there from the rumours. And there's no smoke without fire, but obviously we don't know exactly the conversations that are being had. So I don't think it's necessarily me as Red Bull team principal is my decision fully.
True.
I think there's definitely a lot of opinions and voices that are going into these decisions. I think had Liam Lawson got the same sort of backing that Franco Colapinto does in terms of fan base, in terms of sponsorship, I think that the seat would already be his for next year.
I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Like, as you say, Sergio Perez's sponsorships are a huge part. And it's kind of weird how it does come full circle. Like we were talking about Franco Colapinto and his like dad selling his house to fund his Formula 4 campaign. And now is one of his biggest selling points. Like it's the financial backing that Franco Colapinto has is probably one of the things Red Bull are most excited about, because one of Sergio Perez's major sponsors is also linked to Franco Colapinto. So Carlos Slim has a subsidiary company that is based in Argentina, and Franco Colapinto is already an ambassador for that. So it would be, Red Bull were maybe able to keep contact with Carlos Slim even without Sergio Perez. Whether that would be the case, that would be kind of something that we'll never know about in the background. But it is interesting how you say, if Franco Colapinto's backing was with Liam Lawson or the other way around, it'd probably be a deal done already.
Yeah, and I think nationality plays such a huge part as well. Like, I think that's probably the reason why Zhou Guanyu, not detracting from his talent and how hard he works, but I think that's probably the reason why he's being rumoured to be the reserve driver for Ferrari, if it hasn't already been confirmed. So I think that's definitely a huge factor. But I think that Franco's come in, so I'm not going to say rough and ready, but in a media training sense. He's not been shaped by PR training and all of that kind of thing. And he's one of the only drivers, I'd say, that has entered Formula One as a rookie and really just had their personality shine. And I think he seems very charismatic, very likable. A lot of people just want to root for him naturally. A lot of people want to see him succeed and want to see him do well, regardless of what team he's at, regardless of who you support yourself. I think everyone loves an underdog. Everyone loves a story like his, coming from a working class background to then having this incredible story and an incredible transformation in the past few months of hardly anyone knowing his name to him, outscoring his teammate who has been so consistent for Williams. So I think that there's a lot of different factors, but I think a lot of us F1 fans that want to see him succeed and the fan base that would come with him moving to VCarb RB would be great for their PR and fan base as well. So not only the sponsorship, but also just likability. And, I know how, I'm not comparing Colapinto to Hamilton, but I know how much Mercedes value Hamilton in terms of fan base and, even social media metrics. Something so simple, but
it's one of the key reasons that RB got Daniel Ricciardo back when they did.
Exactly.
It's a huge selling point in terms of that. And Red Bull, as you say, they kind of are the villains of Formula One sometimes. It does feel like, I don't know if you've seen, there was a few interviews, you know, the new Formula One film that's coming up?
Yes.
Because they were working so closely with Mercedes, Red Bull were really scared that they were going to be like the villains of the film, which I feel like,
So funny.
yeah, I feel like Red Bull, because they have sort of become the villains of Formula One, and as you say, a personality like Franco Colapinto's would kind of be great for that, because he is the juxtaposition of Max Verstappen. Like, Max Verstappen feels like he absolutely hates being a Formula One driver, which, considering, you know, he's spent his whole life becoming a Formula One driver, is so strange. But Franco Colapinto is the complete opposite of that. He looks like he's enjoying every single second of it. And like, you see his interactions with like him and Lewis Hamilton, as you mentioned, like he and Lewis Hamilton have this great like back and forth. I think because Franco Colapinto is just a massive fan of Lewis Hamilton and can't believe that he's kind of on the same racetrack as him. But it's so nice to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And like people see themselves in that because, you know, he's still so young. A kid who's just been thrown into Formula One with some of his idols or people that he's looked up to and grown up watching. So, you know, it's abnormal if you're not excited by that and you're not just like so happy at the prospect of being in that situation, you know, doing the drivers' parades and just having the opportunity to just chat to these drivers who have a wealth of experience and that you look up to so much. So, you know, we see that and think, you know, I'd be the same in that situation. I'd be so excited to just be there chatting to them, spend time with them. And they're probably, some of them, giving him a bit of advice or, you know, just sort of there as these figureheads that he's looked up to. So I think, yeah, it's lovely to see, particularly the moments between him and Hamilton.
Yeah, I think they're just like, obviously that's the kind of selling point for him as a personality. But as you say, he then backs that up. He has the consistency. I think he only crashed 4 or 5 times in Formula 3 and Formula 2 combined. Okay, yeah, Brazil as well. But Brazil was just a terrible weekend for Williams. We'll take that out. Like, he deals with jeopardy. He deals with pressure. He knows how to come in and make a difference. His dad selling his house to fund his Formula 4 season, coming in with 9 races to go in a team that was on its knees at one point this season. Got that resilience behind him. He's got that talent as well, just that little bit of sparkle. Like when he goes onto a Formula 1 racing track, he has a go. You know what I mean? And it is so difficult to articulate that, but you watch some of his onboards and it's just exciting. Whereas sometimes you watch an onboard of a Formula 1 driver and it is quite dull. I don't know. There's some nuances and it's difficult to put like why that is, but he does just feel like he's got everything he needs to take that step to be a full-time Formula 1 driver. So to come full circle, if you were Christian Horner, who are you choosing? Are you ditching Sergio Perez? Are you ditching Liam Lawson? Or are you leaving Colapinto at Williams?
If I was me, it would be a different answer. If I'm Christian Horner, I'm doing everything that I can to get Colapinto in the RB, and I'm promoting Liam Lawson to Red Bull and taking a shot, taking a chance. I fear that that's too much pressure for Liam, given that he's not had a full season and wouldn't have had a full season in Formula One. Yes, he stepped in for Danny Rick after he broke his wrist, and obviously he stepped in for the last few races of this season. But I do think that Lawson is a very competitive driver, and could really excel if he has the right team of people around him and has the right support in place. But whether he'd get that at Red Bull or whether it would be a sort of sink or swim situation like we've seen with Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, etc. I think I don't know how much the team has evolved, but I'm aware that there's been a lot of personnel changes since. Things happen quickly in Formula One. No pun intended. But yeah, I don't know. I would be keen, obviously dependent on data, to see Liam Lawson next to Max Verstappen. I think that could be a really strong driver pairing. As for Sergio Perez, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I think he could be great in Formula E. I think Formula E are trying to really tap into that American on North America, Mexico. They've got a race in Mexico as well, and we know that Sergio Perez is very strong on street circuits and could bring a big new audience. So I think he could be really strong there. So if I'm covering all bases, Sergio Perez is going to Formula E, and Liam Lawson to Red Bull, and Colapinto to be teammates with Tsunoda. Apologies that I'm not giving Tsunoda that step up. It doesn't feel. I don't feel he's ready.
No, and it's one of those things that Red Bull never seem to have Tsunoda in those conversations. I think the links to Honda going away. I think Yuki Tsunoda could find himself in a bit of a weird scenario come 2026 as well. But we'll have to kind of wait and see how that develops. But I like it. I like that you've also found Sergio Perez somewhere to go. You considered Sergio Perez's well-being. You've thought about him moving over to Formula E, and as you say, street circuit master. A lot of street circuits in Formula E.
Makes sense.
It's a really good shout. I always had him going to Indy in my head, but I think you're right. I think Formula E is a much better fit for someone of Sergio Perez's experience and qualities. So we'll have to wait and see. But that does round out Colapinto and everything RB Red Bull for the rest of the season. 3 races to go. Could all change. Like, it's very, very swift in Formula One that these things happen. But I think both of us hope that Franco Colapinto will be on the grid for next season. Thank you so much for joining me. Where can people find you?
Thank you so much for having me. Mainly on TikTok and Instagram, just at PitStopNic, NIC, no K on the end. And I am starting to post on YouTube as well, so you can find me there too. But thank you so much for having me. It's been so nice to chat, and yeah, very excited for the last 3 races, and can't wait to see what the future holds for Colapinto as well.
No, thank you so much again. Thank you guys all for watching. Leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Make sure you head over to Nick, PitStopNic, in the comments down below. I was going to say, I got Nick, Nicole. I was just going to throw all of those words together in one way or another. But thank you again, and we'll see you next time.